So thank you very much for inviting me today. I've already learnt a lot and it's just great to be here listening to people's stories and then the shock that actually I've got to say something now. I'm going to talk about a project that we've been involved with really over the last 4 years. And it's another wonderful thing from the Netherlands, as well as Mirror. There is a lot of other things going on and a lot of very powerful research, particularly, and research that is very applied and looks at helping people, and they've been doing that for years. Yeah. Alzheimer cafes came from the Netherlands. You know, a lot of the things that we now take for granted as being the backbone of things that we do, they've been doing for many years. So this was a research project called Meeting Dem. You'll find that every researcher has to make up some word. If it's dementia research, it always has Dem in the title. But this was taking a programme called the Meeting Centre Support Programme for people with dementia and their carers. It was led by Professor Rosemary Drews, who originated meeting centres in the Netherlands. And it was trying to take the learning from the Netherlands to see whether we could implement these centres in the UK, Italy and Poland. So a word about geography. Of course we say the UK in order to get the grant, but actually what that meant was Worcestershire and Herefordshire. So I want to put that up there at the beginning. That was purely practical in that we had to develop centres that were close to our university. But the same for Italy and Poland. You know, they're very regionalised. What goes on in one part of Italy won't go on in another part. So, and in a sense, because we're talking about community focus, actually I can tell you now that the 2 centres we developed, one in Droitwich in Worcestershire and one in Leominster in Herefordshire, those 2 communities, both market towns, both fairly rural areas, they're different as chalk and cheese because they've got different people engaged in them. So this was a big project, cast of thousands here, and I'm very glad that it can go on the website and then all my collaborators will think I've read all of their names out, but I'm going to skip this bit. Shout out though particularly to the Alzheimer's Society, who undertook to do the implementation part of this research as well, so just to big them up. And also very special thanks to Professor Rosemary Drews. Without her and her vision and her energy over the last 30 years, I don't think we certainly wouldn't have meeting centres and we wouldn't be as far ahead as we are in this. Okay, so map of the Netherlands, which probably Mirror is the only one that will recognise what's where. Meeting centres started back in 2004 in the Netherlands, originally in Amsterdam, as part of a community study to say to GPs, people living with dementia and family carers, what is it that you would need in order to live at home with dementia for as long as possible? So the meeting centres came out of that sort of original community engagement and asking people what it was that they needed. So it started with 2 or 3 centres in Amsterdam, went up to 11. There was a big implementation study to look at the effectiveness of meeting centres on the lives of people with dementia and families. Mirror was the leading light in that early research, I believe. That was enough to convince them in the Netherlands that these were a good thing. And there are now 150 centres across the Netherlands. They're supported by the university in Amsterdam, who run training and provide a help desk and information. But essentially each meeting centre is set up by activists within their local community. Okay, so there's a slim national infrastructure and network, but the impetus comes from people in a community thinking, we could have a meeting centre here. So the research that we did, we took the learning from the Netherlands. The first phase was to set meeting centres up in the UK, Italy and Poland. So we looked at whether it was possible to translate this model from the Netherlands into a different country and what the facilitators and barriers were to doing that. And then we researched their impact. Yeah, so that was what the research project was. In the interest of time today, I'm going to spend more time talking about what a meeting centre is and what we did, rather than the research, but happy to talk about the research in detail if people want me to. So what's a meeting centre? Typical meeting centre, it's a very inclusive, friendly, normal focus, but both on the person living with dementia and the family carer in equal part. So both are members of the meeting centre. What you see is a social club, essentially, and the ones that we developed, this is the Droitwich Spa one, meets every Wednesday to Friday in a local community hall, 10 till 4. So every week you know that club's going to be there. It's staffed, quite a slim staff, centre manager, a group coordinator and support worker, and a network of volunteers who work around them. It supports, meeting centres are quite small. They support around 16 to 20 people a day, but that could be 16 to 20 people living with dementia plus family carers as well. And so some people use the centre one day a week, one day a month. Some people come every day. So it over the year, in our first year, we were supporting around 60 people living with dementia. They're very local and very accessible, so they are, what the Dutch have found is that a viable meeting centre serves around a community of about 5,000 older people. So in a big city, you might have 10, 20. We focused on sort of medium-sized market town or a big village. And as well as the social club, there is a very active programme of cooperation and outreach into that local community as well. So it serves very much as a focus for know-how around dementia. We got interested in them because there is an evidence base. You know, this is a lot of what we're doing, particularly around that early support in dementia, isn't evidence-based. We don't have strong. Very local focus, home and community. As I said, there's a very structured way that you get engagement from all of your local community in order to make a meeting centre, and that's quite an interesting part of it. Small permanent team. Centres are always set in non-stigmatising settings, so they're never in a care home or a hospital. It's always in the place where other people would use. People are members, they're not service users. You know, so we talk about members are usually the person with dementia, and a family member will be a family carer. There's a whole programme of information settings and outreach, and in the UK it fits very well into that post-diagnostic support. It's something that if you've got a good dementia-friendly community, it can be a really good next step. It's the sort of what you do after you've generated that interest and network, and it can support people therefore into perhaps more advanced stages. And certainly in our meeting centres we had a whole range of people with different needs. Okay, and the other thing that I liked about it as a psychologist is that it's actually based on an underpinning psychological model called the adaptation and coping model. Now I'm going to not spend a huge amount of time on this, but those of you who like this sort of thing, just be aware that this model exists. This is a whole model to say how we understand issues in any long-term disorder. So, you know, if you get a diagnosis of anything, there are things about you as a person, your history, the symptoms. You make an appraisal of that, so you decide how you're going to react to it. There are then a number of adaptive tasks that you need to do in order to cope well with living with dementia. And that then results in you adapting either well or not. And what the bit in yellow and what Rosemary's early work was about was to say these are the adaptive tasks that if you're diagnosed with dementia, you have to get through. You have to make an adjustment to. And everything that goes on in the meeting centre helps you to do these things. So first of all, for you as a person with dementia and your family carer, it helps you to live with the disabilities. It helps you understand what dementia is, what your dementia is, what it isn't, what gadgets will help, what won't help. So you get a good grip on what the problem is. You need to get back on an even keel emotionally. Getting a diagnosis of dementia, or your loved one getting a diagnosis of dementia, rocks your world upside down. So how do you get yourself back to feeling like you again? And more than that, how do you get your positive self-image back? How do you learn to like yourself again with your dementia? How do you learn to love your husband with his dementia? You know, it's that positive self-image. Preparing for an uncertain future. Nobody can tell you, with your dementia, what life is going to be like in 6 months, 1 year, 5 years. Actually, nobody can tell you, without a dementia, what life's going to be like in 6 months, 1 year, 5 years. But we all pretend we know, you know? And I think one of the shifts of living with dementia is accepting that fact and saying, okay, I've got now, let's do what's important now. Let's make the most of what's going on right now, or next week. Let's not put it off till next year. The other tasks are around relationships, so building those strong and sometimes new social networks become vitally important. And I think that's where the meeting centre has a real strength, because what we found in the town is that by people coming together, actually they often found they knew each other from work, or their kids used to go to the same school, but they didn't know that they knew each other. So you build those new friendships, but also you learn how to maintain those family and friends who seem to disappear when you got the diagnosis, and how to deal with that hurt. You also, with a dementia, early on, have to learn to feel comfortable with care and treatment and talking to professionals about personal things that you never thought you'd have to talk about. You know, so getting used to doing that in a safe environment builds your resilience for later. So I think this is a nice model for us to think about all of the work that we're doing around what works in dementia at this stage. Okay, so we managed to build centres in all the different countries. My international group were really impressed with we were front page news. They didn't realise we were front page news on the Droitwich Advertiser, which is freely done everybody's box. They thought it was the Sunday Times or something. Milan, big city, they opened about 12 meeting centres and all, they did really well. Wrocław in Poland opened 3, and also in Italy and Rimini. So we know that this model travels. It's got the building blocks. It's not impossible to do. Okay, so I'm just going to say a bit about the community engagement, how you get one going. What happens in a meeting, if you want to start a meeting centre, is you call everybody together in your local community and talk about meeting centres. So it's a sort of cascade invitation. And we did the same in Droitwich and Leinster and got around 50 people in the room. Showed the sorts of films, talked about the meeting centre, and from that you have a discussion about should we have one in our town and who's interested in helping us do this. And so that from that you form an initiative group. So that's your planning group who are going to help you decide, help you think about what your meeting centre will look like. So that's from the Leinster group, and you can see you've got the you've got us and you've got the council and housing and carer support and health, but also you've got people like the local solicitors, Halo Leisure Centre, the police, Beat It Percussion, who's a drummer who does a lot of work, you know, a real cross-section of different people coming together who can all help to focus on how you deliver this meeting centre in your town. You also got, we talked about care homes earlier, although this is community, you get care home interest in it, you know, which is great for breaking down those barriers as well. So the initiative group then divides into a number of working groups, because from that big group you'll have people who have specific expertise to enable them to think deeply about these questions. So in order to get a centre going, who's the service aimed at, what's your inclusion and exclusion criteria? We had lots of discussions about parish boundaries and whether somebody could come from over there, you know, all of those sorts of nitty-gritty stuff. What's the programme going to consist of? You know, how are we going to operate this? What was the skills going? Where are we going to have it? Who's going to deliver it? Who are the personnel that can deliver it? How do we manage volunteers? How do we manage training? How we fund it, which is, we know that an average meeting centre costs between 60 to 100,000 a year. You've got 3 members of staff and a venue. That's your big costs. So how you can fund it to start it up and how you can then keep it going longer term. How do you get cooperation between the different parties, and how do you get people in through the door? You know, so in the guidebook, which I've got a couple of somewhere here, which I don't want to take away with me, so first come first served, you'll get one. In the guidebook there's lots of templates for how you do those sorts of things. So I'm not using my microphone anymore, is that okay? I'm loud. Right, so Droitwich Spa took us a year from having that first information meeting. Initiative group met once a month with working group in between. Staff were employed the following June, so a year later, and we opened in September. But that was the first research project meeting centre. Leinster opened more quickly because they'd already done it in the neighbouring county. And that was built on an existing day centre. So it was a day centre that wasn't doing very well, and so to move it on, it turned into a meeting centre. So each meeting centre is different because it will depend on what you've already got in your community and how active people are. But the core is all about this adaptation and coping model and the meeting centre ethos of social health. Okay, I'm going to finish there because we are behind time. I mean, essentially from the research, we've built on the evidence that they've already found in the Netherlands. These help people in terms of their quality of life. They help carers feel confident. People like it. You know, unlike a lot of daycare, people actually want to use this and people want to come back. You've got that very flexible local focus which really helps that. So where we're up to at the moment is research funding has now ended. Both of our meeting centres have now transitioned into forming their own charities. So they are raising funds in their own right to continue the work. And that's been interesting learning for us to know how you can do that beyond the research. We feel quite strongly that we'd like to continue to support this to help other centres develop, and we're currently looking for funding to help us build that infrastructure. Yeah. And that's probably all I want to say at this point. Thank you.